And good morning, everybody. We are live on a beautiful January day here in Colorado. Welcome. My name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group, and this is the Food Safety Chat Live, where every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we do a live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube and talk about all things food safety. And with this, I get to bring on an amazing expert to talk about this subject. And that's a key point here with our conversation is it's not a lecture. This is meant to be a way to share information and help share expertise in the area of food safety because it's not a point of competition. We're all in this together. And in the eyes of the consumer, they judge us accordingly. So pull up a chair. We're going to have a fantastic conversation today because I have Neil Bogart on, who, if you know his name and you know anything about sanitation, this guy is the man. So hopefully I'm not embarrassing you too much, Neil.
No, I'm not turning red at all. No.
So yeah, we got a ton of stuff to go over here today. And so hopefully as everybody's piling in here, let us know where you're at. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, where as I referenced here a little bit ago, Neil, it's going to be, let's see what my thing is. So they keep updating this. It's now going to be nice 56 degrees here, and it's going to keep climbing through Tuesday. So can't complain. Where are you at?
So I'm actually home. So I'm in Alabama, and we're supposed to be in the 70s, which I definitely can't complain because the last few weeks I've been up north between Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and around. And Minnesota was a balmy -20. And I was like, yeah, I'm ready to go home. And so no, it's beautiful. It's raining today, but I'll take the rain and 70 over anything negative any day.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't. Yeah, I lived in Pennsylvania for a while, and as long as it doesn't turn into an ice storm, it's like all good. Nothing worse than an ice storm. And so, yeah, Tasia, I guess you were getting some of that weather up there as well in Minneapolis. Yeah, anytime you visit an area of the country where they have tunnels underground between buildings, not a good sign.
Yeah, you start feeling like what is that? Is it those cages where the rats run around through tunnels and stuff like that?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, like when you're a kid and you have the hamsters, right? And you got the
hamster. That's what. Not a rat. Well, a hamster's basically a rat, but
yeah,
in my eyes,
short tail rat.
Yeah.
And yeah, Morgan knows a few things about rats in Brooklyn. I am sure a few of those guys running around there look more like cats.
I was going to say they're pretty large up there.
Yeah, crazy. So yeah, with that, everybody, and so you beat me to it, Neil. But I'm gonna make you take another sip. Everybody, join us for our favorite beverage choice. Cheers. And another fun thing here is you'll notice here in my background, it's now the year of the snake. We have changed. So as of Wednesday, so the Chinese New Year changed, and we're now in the year of the snake, the wood snake in particular. So last year was dragon, and now we've moved on to snake. So I got my cool little snake guy there, a little ceramic figure that's cute and goofy. I started doing that, gosh, a number of years ago. I was overseas and I picked up a cat, little cat doing this in Singapore. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I've been very gradually, so year over year, as the new year comes up, I'll buy a new thing. I was trying to find, so last year was a Lego dragon, which was super cool. I was trying to find a Lego snake, nothing out there. I was kind of bummed.
Yeah, my youngest daughter's into Legos and she's loves dragons. So we've even put shelving up in her room and she's got multiple dragons, Lego dragons up there. And
cool.
We got one. It was fun. It came in with no instructions. So we had to figure out how to put it together. Old school, like when we were younger and we'd buy a Lego kit, it was just Legos and you'd construct something. And she goes, well, how do I do this? I don't have any instructions. I'm like, you just gotta start figuring it out. So it was a good one. We spent almost 3 months putting that one together.
And so before, well, I guess during Legos, right? Because Legos aren't cheap. There was a knockoff product. So I think I had lock blocks. I think that's what mine were called.
Well, this one, come to find out, was it was a knockoff of Legos. We didn't know it when we were buying it. And so it came with no instructions. So it was, I told her, I said, this one was more fun than the other ones because you actually had to think. And then you'd have to deconstruct sometimes and then rebuild. It was more than just following the instructions.
Absolutely. So everybody's filing in here. Good to see everyone. Duncan's here. Always a good chat when Duncan's here. So Neil, are you ready? Are you ready for the dad joke?
Yes.
As ready as you can be.
As ready.
All right. So here on the chat, right, we've been doing dad jokes here for a while. And I was thinking about this and it got me going to this question. So if you like these dad jokes and you're saving them, what's the best place to save all your dad jokes?
Not a clue.
In a
besides my note.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're going to save all those jokes in a database.
All right, everybody, pick yourself up off the floor.
I love it. Legoland. So Tim's saying here, Legoland had a snake a few years ago at the Mall of America. Cool.
Yeah, that Mall of America is amazing. Went there for the first time not long ago, and wow, I mean, you could practically live there.
Yeah, it's a monster. Lego. So my wife and I went to we did a vacation in Scandinavia, and we went to Copenhagen and kind of up to Sweden and stuff. And I regret it. Right, we didn't make it to the Legoland. We didn't make it to the big park that they have there. And I hear that's really, if you're into Legos, that's the place to go.
No, it's amazing what they're doing with Legos now. I mean, again, back in the day, growing up, we just got a bag of Legos, and
then you try and
so it's totally different game now.
I used to like making mazes, and I would make a little maze, and I would do doors like that would slide in and out of the slots, and so that was my height of creativity. And watch this. This is how you know you're dealing with a pro here on the food safety chat. So just like Legos in a plant, we are using different blocks in order to build our systems and programs to have a beautiful structure at the end.
It all relates back to Legos. So
that's right. Everything is Legos. So with that, anytime I've got you on the chat here, Neil, and also thank you. You've had a really super busy week, and getting to this chat was not an easy thing. Limited sleep. So thank you for your dedication to food safety and helping others out. I really appreciate that.
Anytime. I mean, this is fun. I mean, I actually, and I apologize for not being as available this week to work with you on this, but this is what makes my job fun. Anytime we can share and help each other out. I mean, I don't want to take this stuff to the grave. I want others to take it and learn from my experience. And of course, we all make mistakes. We all learn from mistakes, but we also have just different things that we learn throughout our career. And the more we can share, especially when it comes to sanitation, because it's such a small community that's involved in sanitation versus, I mean, you see a lot more people really focused in on quality, which I've done that through my career too. I mean, I was over quality for a good sized company, and but sanitation, I've fallen in love with it. It's a real tight knit community, and the neat thing is we're starting to come together with more stuff. I mean, there's more roundtable groups. There's another roundtable being developed right now for sanitation, and it's literally just sit down and discuss what are our learnings, how can we share, how can we help each other through traversing all this, and even what we're going to talk about today, new guidances from the government. How do we traverse this new guidance from the government, or even just generally everything that we keep learning throughout our day-to-day operations?
Yeah, and it's like that old saying, right? You have to keep learning, because if you don't, you're going to decay. There's no standing still in what we do. And I think too, right? Sanitation, Neil, is one of those things that really truly demonstrates something that I think sometimes we forget in quality and food safety, is that documents don't do things. People do things. And the documents are only there to give them guidelines on what they should be doing. And if things go astray, how they respond to that and how they let their boss know what's going on. But the actual processes and the training, that one-on-one thing, it's sanitation is the perfect example of that, right? You bring in a new employee, the supervisor sits down with them and says, okay, I'm going to show you now how to clean this piece of machinery. And I'm going to train you, I'm going to teach you, and then I'm going to watch you do it to make sure that you're doing it correctly. And if you have any questions, I'm going to be right over there. That's how things get done.
No, I was having a good discussion with a couple friends of mine. We all graduated college together, and we were talking. We have a group chat between the three of us, and we just throw different topics in there periodically. And we started talking about structure of organizations this week, and where should quality be reporting through? Then how does sanitation fit into all this structure of reporting? Because I've got one of our friends on this group is a VP of operations for a large company, and they're trying to grasp, from a food safety culture, from efficiency, and all these different things. What is that best structure? And so we were talking about, okay, should quality report? Where does quality go? And and my comment is quality should never report to any type of operations function. It should go straight over the other direction. And then ultimately, where should sanitation fit? Should it be on its own, or should it come up under quality? To me, quality and sanitation are stuck at the hip.
Oh yeah,
they need to be going back and forth with information to each other. So, but then he brought up, well, is there really proof that that's necessary to pull quality that direction? And he brought up the luncheon meat company, and I said, but that's a different situation. I said, you had so many failures throughout that process, from regulatory and internally inside that company, that you can't justify your decisions based off of something like that. This is right. You got to step away from that. Yep.
If you were able to pull aside senior executives in companies, so we'll say like Boar's Head or something like that, after a major issue, and said, did you know what was going on? I can guarantee they're going to be like, no, we thought everything was going fine. The information we were getting was that everything was going fine.
Yep. And that's a gap, right? So how do we make sure, you need to have somebody focused on quality and food safety that sits on the board. In my eyes, there should be somebody that understands that and is focused on that from the board's perspective. But it's also our job as employees to make sure that they're getting the right information. Third-party audits these days, we don't look at those, and we're having that as an internal discussion ourselves. It's really our internal audits that should be really driving how we run our business, and that's the information that needs to be going back up to the board versus, hey, we got a great audit and everything's great. That's a 1-day snapshot, 2-day snapshot. Yeah. But it's us. We should be stressing our own systems to say, are we doing it well or not?
Yeah, we know where the skeletons are hidden, and hiding them doesn't do anyone any good. You have to get rid of them.
Yep.
So with that, with continuous improvement and looking at these type of issues, so as I wrote in the posting for this, is FDA has been kind of busy. They've been putting out some new guidance documents, and it's interesting, Neil, because there's a trend I'm seeing in that they're being much more prescriptive than they have before.
Yeah. And that's a problem, really. I struggle with how to answer this. The FDA, they don't work in processing plants. They visit them.
Right.
And they don't understand how things work like we do. Like we were talking about stressing our own systems, right? We know our own skeletons and stuff. And so really we should be the ones defining that. And if it's getting to the point where the government feels that they need to be this prescriptive, then I think we as an industry are failing. And I think that's why some of this, you're going to see a lot more, especially on sanitation, of people from different companies coming together to really dive into this, because FSMA came on because we as an industry failed. Yeah. We brought that upon ourselves. And I feel anytime the government feels that they have to get this prescriptive or anything to this point, then somehow we're failing. And we need, as an industry, need to go back and say why. Right. What have we caused to let this happen. So I'm very passionate about that part. I can go on.
Well, and we see the public criticisms. It's like recalls never go down. We see the same amount of issues every year. We have 2 or 3 major events that put people at risk, and people die in those instances. And people are really pushing. I mean, this is becoming more and more transparent. It's with X and Facebook groups, and people get this information very, very quickly now on what's going on, and people know. And I think that's good, right? That there's a light been shown on what's going on relative to food safety. And it's on us. You're absolutely right, Neil. It's on us to fix this. And part of, I think this is, and I'll kind of talk about this a little bit here toward the end of the chat as well, is maybe what we're doing right now isn't enough, right? Because if we're not getting the results that we want, what are we not, right? It's kind of the dog not barking thing. What are we not doing? What are we not looking at? And we'll talk about that a little bit more.
And self-assessment is one of the hardest things in the world to do. Even from a personal growth perspective, I was having this discussion with somebody the other day. It's like, it's when you're looking at personal growth, it's the hardest thing in the world to self-assess yourself. And it wasn't until I had a friend of mine back in college, and he's in this group chat that I was talking about earlier. He looked at me and said, "Neil, you're an asshole." And I was like, wow. And now we're like brothers, but it's just, I at that time I had a real strong type A personality. I had come out of industry. I had owned businesses. I went back to college for my food science degree. And so I wasn't a student just coming out of high school. I was going back to get another degree. And so, I had I had a lot more grasp of reality. Number one, I wasn't coming straight out of high school, but it was it was a cultural shock for me. And so I had to adjust, and I didn't get mad at him. I actually took a step back and said, okay, if he thinks that, then others are thinking that. And what do I need to do to correct that? And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, actually, quite frankly. Because it really helped me to, not only do we have to do that for ourselves, but we have to do that for what we do as a career. How do we deconstruct? How do we self-criticize without taking it personal? What we're doing to make things better. And Larry mentioned accountability. Absolutely. I mean, accountability is another very hard one, but you have to hold yourself accountable first. And that can be hard.
Yeah, it's like that. What was that old saying, right? When you're pointing at someone, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. Right?
Exactly.
People are very unwilling to look at their own faults, and we see this through social media all the time now. Good luck getting in an argument with someone on X and having them actually go, "Hey, you know what, Neil? That was a good point. I recognize that. I'm gonna have to rethink my position." Nope.
No,
never.
I don't even belong to any of those networks. So I do my LinkedIn, and that's about it. So it's I stay off of that. To me, it's more toxic than it is
it's
helpful. I don't know. It's just
So with that, what we're talking about today relative to FDA and draft guidances. So we spoke about one earlier. Now we're also bringing up another one, which is FDA's draft guidance for environmental pathogen hazards in low moisture foods. And again, to our point, and we'll bring up this document here in a second, is that, this is like, all right, so FDA is not only saying ready to eat meat, products, they're saying low moisture, ready to eat products. Very, very honed in on what they're looking at. And what kind of caught my attention here for the chat is a really good article summarizing this that was put together by Miley Gradison and Annika Baran Altieri over at Hogan Lovells, which is a fantastic food safety law office in DC that I've used in the past. Miley, I've known for a long time. I'll put the article here. That's kind of a summary of what we're talking about. I'll put the link in the locals group. I'll put the link at the end too, and I'll also put the draft guidance in there as well. But it's always a really good use of time when I have an expert here on the chat who is an expert in sanitation to kind of go through this and get your thoughts on this relative to what FDA is thinking and how you think this extrapolates into this particular area. So it's kind of my opening preamble. It makes sense.
Yeah, let's dive into it. No, and it's
All
funny
right.
because uh, I was, of course, I've been studying it, and ever since it came out, um, and I'd have to say, I'm very fortunate to be in a company where I feel we have this pretty well locked up already. But then when it starts getting into the prescriptive stuff, that's where I start having issues, and
Yeah.
we'll be discussing that today. But I think a lot of this is common sense. Some people say common sense is gone, but it's there's very few people left with it. But it's yeah, when we start getting into the prescriptive part of it is where I start having issues because some of it's not even feasible. But
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's dive into this. And so I think first off on this, and then we'll pull this guy up here so we can kind of do a side by side. So I'll put a clean copy of this in the locals group for everybody. The copy I'm going to be looking at today, I kind of highlighted a few things for us to talk about. So, clearly people should go through this on their own and kind of figure out what they're most interested in as well. So let's pull this guy up. Boop. There it is. So look at this long title: Establishing Sanitation Programs for Low Moisture, Ready to Eat Human Foods and Taking Corrective Actions Following a Pathogen Contamination Event. Guidance for Industry. Whew. Okay, man, I feel a little lightheaded after reading all that. So 37 pages. So, not too long for a guidance
no,
document. And a point of clarification for people who normally don't deal with these type of documents is FDA goes through a process of creating what they call draft guidance, and so they're looking for public comment. They're saying these are things that we're recommending. They're not necessarily required, but as anybody who has any experience in industry, like Neil knows, as he's shaking
they're
his head,
required.
it's required, and it's going to become regulations, right? It's
Yes.
they're just pre-announcing their intentions associated with these activities. So, can you be audited to this? Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
Should you
and they
push
will.
back? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an
And you were going
interesting.
to go down the rabbit hole. Should you push back?
Ah,
Absolutely. There's
yeah.
nothing wrong with pushing back. Again, it's you have to be respectful about it, but the respect needs to be from both parties, right?
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with pushing back. And again,
Mhm.
if you're going to push back, make sure you have the data to support what you're doing. And that's really what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Is so many people they have tons of data. And we've talked about this before in previous chats. Is you have all this data, but so many people don't use the data,
Yeah.
and we have to use that data to make our decisions. And we're going to dive
Mhm.
into some of that today through some what I talk about. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
it's critical.
yeah, a good way to think about that is we have lots of data, but you need to transform that into information, which I define that as something that's actually usable and actionable. Right? Collecting a
Yeah,
bunch of stuff doesn't mean anything.
and data is not just microbiological. There's so
No,
much more
no.
data out there that we have, and it has to be overarching. You have to look at everything when you're
Mhm.
making these decisions on how you're going to have your program set up, how are you going to react, and so on and so forth.
Yep. I think a good
Excited.
piece of advice here for everybody is relative to this pushing back pieces. Yeah, number one, pick your battles. Right? It,
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
it has to be something that you're willing to, die on that hill, as they say. Um, Another big piece of it is you have to understand what you're talking about so you can make those decisions. And the argument the positioning I use with this applies for third party audits or anything else is when you're talking with the investigator or the SQF auditor or whatever, is understanding the context of what the standard or the regulation is asking for. And if that auditor goes out of bounds, that you can identify that, but doing it in a polite way. So,
yeah.
the mental image I use on this, Neil, is, and this goes back and dates me, is Columbo. And so Columbo was a detective from the 70s and 80s, super brilliant, but kind of slovenly. He had a cigar, and he would very politely corner the bad guy. Right?
Hmm.
A lot of times the bad guy would be helping him because he was so congenial. But it would be, you need to kind of have that attitude of, oh, excuse me, Mr. Auditor, I'm a little confused here because what you're saying here, I don't quite understand what the standard, how this applies here. Can you walk me through your logic on this? Right. So you're being non-confrontational. You're not saying, this is what the standard says, and no, I disagree, and you're an idiot. No, that's not going to get you anywhere. you have to always bring them to your side of the table and say, hey, let's work together. I need to understand what you're telling me, and I'm not seeing this in what the standard of the guidance requires. And a lot of times you'll get an answer back that says, well, yeah, it doesn't really say that, but this is what I think you should do. Oh, okay, well, that's your opinion? Yeah, that's my
Yep.
opinion. Okay, well, I'll think about that, right? You can save
Yeah.
yourself a ton of headaches just by using that little technique.
It's funny you mentioned Columbo. I'll toss this in. My daughter, my oldest daughter's wanting to become a forensics accountant. And
Ah,
my daughters like the older TV shows, and I had them start watching Columbo, and they love it. They watch it all
oh,
the
it's an
time.
amazing show.
Yeah.
And the guest stars, holy crap. Like William Shatner will be on there, with his long 70s hair. It's awesome to
Yep.
watch. Last night we watched an episode of Kojak.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
been a while. Yeah.
We were on Amazon Prime. I'm like, holy crap, there's Kojak. Let's check it out. And it's hilarious, right? The old piece of crap, right? So everything in the 70s, right? I'm gonna get crap for this. Everything in the 70s, people are gonna argue about the music, but when it came to cars and things like this, oh, garbage, absolute garbage, right? And you see these old Ford LTD sedans with the cops are driving around and they're just bouncing like boats and
Oh,
trying to go around corners. And it's just like, oh, that is so terrible. And we had to live through that. So if you
yes,
didn't,
we did.
you're lucky that you didn't. Anyway, I digress. So with the document here, and there was 4 main areas in here that Miley identified, and I'm sorry, Annika also, I want to give her credit too, and that's kind of forming the basis of going through this document. And number one, the recommendation is, this will be in the locals group again, read through this whole thing and then evaluate what we're saying around this to what you're doing in your plants and say, Brian's full of crap. That doesn't apply to us. Fair, right? Every plant, every company is different. So always taking that
Yeah.
into consideration of what you should be doing. So
Well,
enough of that.
Brian, is just because they wrote this for low moisture doesn't mean they're not going to use it in other areas also.
Right.
Well, so
yeah, that's a good point. And I mean,
they tend to extract certain pieces of it. And we've had this happen through some of our inspections, is they'll take a piece from over here, a piece from over there of different guidances and put together, like you said, it's what they believed. And so, and then their justification was, oh, well, we have this guidance right here. Well, that's not even pertinent to my industry, but yet is it? Some of this stuff is really pertinent to all industries. Like we're going to get into like Kappa and stuff like that, all that's pertinent to everybody. So.
Yeah, I think to get started here is, so what are some good examples of low moisture, ready to eat foods? Because I think a lot of times what people think about, they miss. So I think a prime example when I look at a document like this would be, let's say, like a granola bar product, a Cliff Bar, to name a brand, right? Where you're taking a bunch of low moisture ingredients, putting them together in a bar, chopping them up and packaging them. It's a low moisture product. You're not going to be getting growth on the shelf, but it's ready to eat. And the major risk on a product like that is you have no kill steps. Right? You are completely reliant upon your programs and systems to make sure that product is safe. And so as I read through this document, Neil, that's kind of what's going through my mind, is that perfect example of how this applies. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's kind of dive in here. So the first thing that the Hogan Lovells paper talks about is really that the recommendations for the programs are pretty consistent with what we're doing. But there was, and this caught my eye too, within here, they're starting to talk about in here different breaks relative to sanitation, right? So you go through all the fun stuff that FDA talks about here. And you get to this, right? We talked about the low moisture definition. So within here, this seems kind of a little low to me, with the 0.85. But that's what they're saying for the moisture activity in the product. And again, this is a ratio of the moisture that is in the product that is actually not locked up in some way, and the bacteria can utilize it as a metabolic pathway source without water. So for example, jelly and things like this, why don't those go bad? Well, it's because there's water in there, but it's all locked up. The bacteria and the mold and stuff can't get to it. The only time you see mold in a jar of jelly or something like this is up at the top, because moisture comes off the top due to convection and heat, collects a little bit of water up there, and then it gets above that 0.85 in this example, and the bacteria and the mold go awesome, right? And they start growing, and you get mold on the surface. So that's kind of how that works on that side. So within this, so we're saying here that so through a contaminated ingredient, right? So if you have this type of granola product, and they're actually going through, to your point, and hop in here at any point, Neil, as I'm going through this, is if you have a ready-to-eat product like the example I gave, your supplier control programs are extremely important because you are completely reliant upon them for your food safety.
Yeah, and so I go to the the PIF market, so that's the infant formula market. One of the situations that happened through all that whole Chronobacter fiasco over the past few years was an ingredient coming in that had Chronobacter in it. And so in making infant formula, you have your mass base that goes through a process that you control, but then you have some of these micronutrients and stuff like that that's added in afterwards because you can't put it through the heating step or destroy it. Right. So it's all post kill additions. And so the Chronobacter is coming in that way. And so that's when I started, raising at the top of my lungs as much as I could. I was like, it's not just these manufacturers who are making the infant formula, it's everybody making ingredients. Anybody doing a spray dry process or making a dry ingredient, they're all at risk. Yeah. And so, the ingredients coming in is critical.
Right. And with that, when you think about these large spray dried commodities, so whey protein concentrates, non-fat dry milk, all of these different type of products, those manufacturers of those raw materials produce those in gigantic lots because you can't shut that equipment down. It's it's extremely expensive to remove that thermal mass from that process and then bring it back up to operating temperature. Cost companies, hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. As a consequence, they have very long production runs, which means you have a lot of risk. And if you have a ready-to-eat, we'll keep with this granola bar example, and you're putting ingredients into this that fall into those categories, you're probably going to want to do your own raw material testing and screening for pathogens or whatever you're concerned about on that product, even though you've got a COA.
Yeah, and they actually get into, sampling of product. You go back to is that your end all be all, and it's not just sampling of the product coming in, but you better be doing some risk assessment, and should you be visiting those sites to really make sure they're honed up on their sanitation programs and all that too, because testing final product is not the answer. We need to be making sure that everything else is supportive of producing the good product, right?
Right. So, and in this article, and we'll get through this draft guidance on that point as well, is FDA actually says in here, you should consider, and they're wording this pretty strongly, finished product testing. But to your point, Neil, they're saying that's only a verification. That is not a control. This is only to make sure everything that you're doing is actually working. Because statistically, testing finished product, it's a needle in a haystack. You're not going to be able to grab enough samples to make it valid. It's a shot. So also here within it, they're talking about contaminated ingredients along the processing line where it's exposed to the environment, where the product is exposed. So really here, they're starting to really talk about indirectly in here, zone 1 and zone 2, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I coined it years ago, the forgotten coast too. And we can't forget zones 3s and 4s because we have to look at how does this bacteria get into our facility in the first place? What's its mode of transfer through and getting even to zone 2 and zone 1? And there's so much emphasis because we want to keep our production lines running that we only focus in on 1 and 2, and we can't forget zone 3s and 4s. Now, of course, you're not going to be sampling as much out there and all that, but your sanitation programs have to be very strong out there. And that's the part that I think a lot of companies are struggling with because they're so focused on keeping zone 1 and 2 in better condition so they can run. That it's almost like a war. It's a battle. You want to put up blockers to keep it from even coming that direction. So it's a critical process, and you start getting into EMP programs and And I
Yep.
mean, I know we're going to get into all this here in just a little bit too, but it's just, to me, your environment is critical. But then it says along the process lines, we have to take a step back and say, how can it even get into my product? It's saying open product, but what does that truly mean? You may have shaker tables and stuff like that, or belts where the product's traveling down. But let's say even through a dry ingredient that's running through pipes, and we take samples. Well, that's an opening into the product. Did we cross contaminate it by taking samples? So gaskets, I harp on this all the time. Anytime you have a gasket failure, then you're pulling stuff from the environment into your product. So now that is an open environment to your product. And you have to take that into account as part of your assessment.
Right. Well, and that's what's kind of nice about this document is don't get lulled into as you're going through this. Oh yeah, I know all this stuff, right? This is actually a pretty good gathering of information, to your point, Neil, from different sources on everything that you need to be looking at. So it's a nice summary and refresher to make sure that you're looking at everything that you need to be looking at. And FDA is also, as we're going through this, they're kind of commenting on here as well. They're putting in a little bit of opinion. They're saying, here are areas where we constantly see failures. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later too. So they're kind of doing some preaching in here too. This kind of, right. So introduction to water, right? If you're in a dry environment, there's nothing worse than that roof leak or a condensate coming off of those air conditioning units that are hanging above that's the first thing these guys are going to look at. There's nothing worse in a dry plant than water and pooling water. And we've seen large recalls. I'm thinking of a large peanut butter recall that occurred because of environmental condensation in the plant for that low moisture product that they didn't fix. And so FDA made them recall. There was no direct linkage to product. They did it strictly based upon that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's numerous other things too. You have to, again, look at your process. Let's say you're using negative airlifts or dense phase transfer of ingredients, and you can do that for bar manufacturing, many different aspects. We produce kibble, in some of our plants. And so you're using all that. Do you have any of these pipes going outside then coming back in your facility? Are they sealed? Is there a potential for condensation inside your line just because of the way it was piped? Or you're going from one room to another room and there's temperature differentials. And does that cause condensation even inside your piping or your mode of throughput for some of your ingredients? So yeah, it's all critical.
Yeah, and a lot of times, right, most of the plant designs that we go and visit, they're flat roofs. And fixing roofs is extremely expensive, right? So plants have to have massive CapEx projects to fix roofs, and it takes years to fix it, right? We'll just put some buckets out on the floor in the meantime. No. So they've done a nice job here with the kind of the main areas for transfer, to your point, Neil. What are the different vectors for transferring within the plant? And the last one here, air and aerosol. So if you're in a dry plant, you're not using water to clean. And so I know you'll lose your top, as I would, if you're walking through the plant, you see somebody with a compressed air line going, right, blowing things off. And things are just billowing everywhere. And you're just like, no, you can't do that.
Yep. No, and actually Camden BRI, for those of you who are familiar with them, did an awesome study on air particulate floating in the air and how long these particulates stayed in the air. And it's absolutely amazing. They actually had to end the study because it went on for so long that these particulates were still floating in the air. And so, but then you look at it, the particulate size and how much bacteria each one of those particulates could be carrying with it. And then you also look at not just, so they say air and aerosolization of particulates, but we also have to look at our positive airflow in our facilities and how that's mapped, right? And so many people look at it only from a production standpoint. And that's a problem because then when we shut down to do sanitation, going back to my sanitation, is, your airflow can change. And now all of a sudden you may have particulate that's in your raw area or pre-kill area floating into your post-kill area. And so that's a critical thing to start watching and making sure. You have to assess your air balance, not only in production, but also during sanitation or any type of shutdown. Or
Yep,
let's say
absolutely.
even just like we have one facility that has 4 dryers. If we shut
Mhm.
down one dryer in that facility, the air balance adjusts. So we had to put in automatic sensors in our facilities to be measuring the pressures, and then the system would automatically adjust itself for whatever our processing parameters changed in our facility. And so that was
Mm.
a critical adjustment.
That's a brilliant point. And if you pick up one new learning from our chat here this morning, that was it. We got a couple of questions here for us. Let's
Yeah.
take a look at the questions here, and then we'll get back into it. Let's see. So where'd the first one go? Are you an advocate, Neil, for having dedicated tools that are only permitted for use in Zone 1?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you can't do it, and I understand the cost and the management of that, because again, you go back to managing. You can have all these programs, but how do you manage these programs, right? How do you make sure that takes place? At least add swabbing of tools to your program,
Yeah.
and you don't have to swab them for a salmonella or a Chronobacter or whatever you want to swab for. Swab them for EB, swab them
Yeah.
for coliform or
And
whatever.
Kovac.
What is your risk of your process?
Mhm.
And that will tell you real quick, are the tools being managed or not?
Yep, that's always a fun time, isn't it? Opening up the little toolkits that maintenance guys have.
Not just
Uh,
the maintenance, but I walked into one facility and some employees were taking stuff apart, and they're like, they don't look like normal tools for the facility. And I said, where'd you get these tools from? And they said, well, we had to bring them from home. And I
mm,
was like, oh,
yeah,
so
operators have because the operators are running a machine and they've got their own little toolkits, right? And they're adjusting the heater heads and
mhm,
whatever. And those tools generally sit there all the time, right? They put them on top of something when they're done with their
yep,
shift, or maybe they put them in their locker because, to your point, that's their tools, and they never get cleaned.
yep.
Good question. Good question. Let's dive back into the document here. Boop. And so those are the type of things we're talking about there. Techniques, right? We're obviously not going to read this to everybody, but the next point in there that they were talking about was sanitation as a preventive control, environmental monitoring, and FDA comments really here on how to design a sanitation program, which I thought was very interesting. Um, so obviously here, a lot of review of the records here that they're talking about as well, which should be part of what your PCQI is doing as well.
Mhm.
A very useful exercise to take place in your production facilities is, again, right, plants break down into 4 main areas: receiving, processing, packaging, and warehousing. For each of those 4 different steps in your process in the plant, what documentation are you gathering for food safety? What are you gathering for food quality? And now, what are you gathering for enhanced traceability, FSMA 204, and then everything else? So, on those different forms, where is that information? And if you have a problem, where do you find it? Ideally, that information should be in a packet that the QA manager, the PCQI, and the plant, whoever, compiles that information. So, if you have an issue during a particular production day, you just go back to that file or wherever you're storing that information, and you can quickly retrieve that information to see if you have an issue. And that review, don't forget that the PCQI or the qualified individual or whoever is signing off on those records has to sign off as part of your food safety plan on those
Mhm.
preventive control documents. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
And really,
And
FD, I think, is emphasizing this point here.
yeah, and Duncan makes a good point over here. If you have data, but it doesn't influence decisions and actions, it's just trivia. Yeah. So, uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I like that comment, Duncan. That's absolutely true.
Yep, Duncan always comes through with good statements. Um, So let's see here. So investigation of issues, right? So you have a hit. What do you do? So this again, FDA is getting pretty prescriptive here.
So you
And
go through as an auditor, right? And you audit facilities and you look at, okay, yeah, you had a situation, and you look at their CAPA program and it says, we re-cleaned it, re-sanitized it, and we retrained the employee. And then a couple weeks later, they have the same situation happen again. We re-cleaned it, we re-sanitized it, we trained the employee. that's a broken program. And I've even told my own plants, I will not accept that answer in a CAPA.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
not. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
No, I was going to say, yeah, you want to tick me off. Give me the corrective action response that says retrain operator.
Yeah, that's the worst response you could ever have. You have a broken program, and
Yep.
that's a major. Yeah, I won't accept that answer. And if they don't truly get down to the root cause, we're going to keep going back and diving in, because
Yep.
that is not acceptable. That's what
Yep.
gets us in trouble. This is why we have a prescriptive program being delivered from the FDA. Again, we allowed
Yes.
this to happen to ourselves.
Yeah. FDA is saying, okay, fine. You guys can't figure it out. We'll figure it out for you.
Yeah, yeah, they're
We
coming
don't
in to
want
help.
and really here under Section E, right, is a perfect example of that. Is our investigations of these operations has revealed examples of. So what FDA is doing here is they are directly saying is, here's the screw ups we're finding, right, in the
Yep.
document. Significant inadequacies in the steps for food facilities to identify and correct food safety problems, to your point. Inadequacies in cleaning and sanitation. Inappropriate reliance on product testing to identify food that's affected by a contamination event. How many times, as food safety professionals, we know, we see a recall, FDA announces a recall, and then a week or two later, we see FDA has expanded a recall. That means FDA went into the plant, saw what the plant was doing, and went, no, right? Because the first response to the plant is, oh, okay, cool, I'll just recall this particular product that FDA is involved, that's directly linked with this issue. Is that it? Right? Plants do a pretty poor job of identifying the other potential risks, lines that are nearby, rework. Oh my God, rework, right? Oh, right. So in these examples, let's say that you're making a granola product, and at the end of the production day, you've got a Hobart, and you're mixing the ingredients and those things, and then you got a bunch of product left in that mixer. Right? The operation guys are like, well, we can't waste that. Let's put it in a bin, and we'll save it for tomorrow, and we'll start up tomorrow with the stuff from yesterday. Well, guess what? You now have a continuous production. You don't have sanitation breaks, and you're going to have a massive recall because of that.
Absolutely.
It's the first thing FDA.
But they were trying to do the right thing, And I had a friend of mine say that to me one time. She said, I went in for a situation. It was a meat manufacturing plant. They kept getting microbiological spoilage on their meat after it's coming out of the aging room, but they kept getting written up by the USDA. They kept getting a NR for a situation that was in there. So the operator's like, well, I'll just take it to his control, and he started cleaning there. So he took a high pressure hose and started cleaning the floors and all this stuff. Well, the NRs went away, but then their micro counts went up on the meat. Well, why? Because he's sitting there hitting it with a high pressure hose. Yeah, he took care of the USDA's concern, but now he just contaminated all the meat inside the room, where before the contaminants were on the floor, they were down below the meat. It wasn't going to hurt the meat. So yeah, you have to look at all that.
Yep. So I pulled this out here under Section 3 because it's, stating the obvious. It's something that we preach a lot here on the chat, is verification. And we talked about this last week. Verification of your activities. What are you doing to verify that those sanitation activities actually worked, right? Rinse water testing, things like, you need to have documentation that shows that your cleaning was done correctly. So you validate to set up your programs, but that verification program is extremely important, because if it didn't work, you need to, guess what? Not run. You need to re-clean. You just can't go, oh, geez, that's too bad. No, you can't do that.
I'm excited for new technology for that, Brian, because when you get into manual cleaning, and they talk about manual cleaning but manual cleaning, it's hard to verify the process because of the employees' actions, how they work and all that stuff. Everybody's different. It's not like a CIP system where it's very prescriptive. It has a recipe. It's all mechanical and all that. Of course, stuff like that breaks down, but is utilizing your cameras in your facilities. They're in there already from a food defense standpoint, but you can also utilize those as part of your assessment of, are we cleaning properly or not, and be part of your verification program. And even some of the new tools coming out where AI can look at video and say, are they following the right things? So there's some new technology coming out. I'm excited for that.
Yep. Imagine, we've mentioned this on the chat before. Imagine a camera that's set up with AI on your hand washing stations.
Yeah.
So now you've got AI monitoring that to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I've got AI cameras all the way around my house now. And it's interesting because it'll tell me if this is somebody who hasn't been here before, it will tell me. And then it'll pop up on my phone and say, hey, there's somebody here we haven't seen before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Stranger danger. Yeah. So I pulled out this, and we're not going to read through this because we're getting short on time, but is very good elements here of what you should be thinking about if you're in a dry production environment, how to control water. And to your point earlier, Neil, okay, dry environment, but other ones too, right? It does. If you have standing water sitting around, or roof leaks, or things like this, condensation. Oh my God, condensation. Everybody should be looking at these things. Sanitation breaks, right? Continuous versus, you need to have, and I want to make sure to bring up this point because it needs to be, right? We need to drill this. You need to have bookends. You need to have CIP to CIP breaks. How long is that? What type? And this really ties into risk, is how comfortable are you with having longer runs versus shorter runs? Because that's going to be your window of exposure. So for example, in past dairy plants that I worked at, and I set up, corporate programs for these things for risk. So riskier products that we made had shorter breaks where we would do testing on a daily basis. Products that had lower levels of risk, let's say mozzarella, things like that. Okay, fine. We're comfortable with a longer period of risk. We're going to run a week before we throw all of the rework from the cooker stretcher away. We're willing to tolerate a potential recall that's a week long versus a day. Now, again, to dry products or things like this, your window of exposure for your production sanitation breaks could be a month or more.
Yeah. No, and that's where it's a full team effort. You have to have attorneys involved in that discussion, your finance department in that discussion, and your insurance company, because your insurance company will only accept so much too. So even though the insurance company says their piece, you still have to make the decision for yourself of what your company's willing to take into risk.
Right. And we've seen this with high profile commodity recalls for powders, so non-fat dry milk as an example, where, okay, fine, you had recall insurance, but if there's millions of dollars on the line, the lawyers for the insurance company are going to push back and say, okay, well, you said you were doing this, but you didn't do it. So for example, if you have car insurance and as part of your rate, you say, okay, I always wear a seatbelt, and you get in a wreck and you didn't have a seatbelt on, guess what? You're not getting paid. Same thing here. Equipment design and maintenance, of course, right? Definitely go through these.
Tons,
hazard analysis. If you're in a dry environment like this, salmonella, they're pretty much saying here, and this is where FDA is being prescriptive again, you need to have salmonella as part of your hazard.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. I'm dealing with some people right now, and they've got listeria as called out on their as a risk from a dry perspective. And I'm like, really? So if you're handling salmonella, wouldn't that not handle the listeria? What's the hierarchy there, right? And so, I'm having those discussions right now.
So it's very interesting here, right? So they start getting into monitoring and verification, right? We've been talking about this already. The piece I definitely wanted us to talk about here, right, is looking at your trends, et cetera, et cetera. Guess what they're talking about in here? And I don't think it's in this paragraph yet as I scroll, and sorry about the scrolling, is for your corrective actions and your root cause, they're also recommending in here that you start testing and looking at resident strains for bacteria in the environment and contamination strains that may be, transient moving through that. And Neil, they are now recommending in this document here in section G, everybody read this section when you get this document. They are now saying the best thing for you to do is whole genome sequencing, and you should be doing this.
Yeah, right. This is, I called up a microbiologist friend of mine this morning. We were talking about this, and it's, I struggle with this one a lot because they're asking us to do that because it actually helps them out. It's still, there's issues around the science of WGS. There's issues around science of everything. Really, and she made a comment that, and we've talked about this before, is if I were to know this, would this change my behavior? So if I know I have an issue, do I really need to know as deep down into it? Yeah, it's interesting sometimes to know if you have a resident strain, but you don't have to determine it's a resident strain by WGS. You can use other stuff.
Right.
You can do serotyping, ribotyping. There's many different ways of looking at bacteria. None of it's a perfect science, including WGS. What I'm looking at it from a sanitation standpoint, if I've got bacteria there, it's a problem and I need to clean it. And when you start looking at environmental bacteria, especially when you're swabbing floors and stuff like that, you have to look at what's happening in your facility because there's so many more factors that play into this. I was doing a cleaning regime on one facility that should have knocked out anything living, and I had a bacteria that was still surviving. And so I had to think outside the box and actually developed a brand new cleaner because the flooring in that one little section was not sealed. So it was concrete, not sealed. And so when you deal with that, so utilizing some of these cleaners, they were getting tied up, from cations, anions, and all that stuff getting tied up. So they weren't being able to do their job and kill the bacteria, right? So we had to put some other ingredients into a situation to help knock those down. So you have calcium, magnesium, lime, and concrete, right? That creates hard water. What does hard water do to cleaning solutions? It ties up most of your chemistry. And so I had to put chelates inside that formula to tie that up. So then the other stuff could do their job. And so I just need to know if it's there. And even in the dairy industry, when I was in the fluid dairy industry, all these people go and start doing typing. And I know we're getting close to the end, Brian, but this is a soapbox item for me. They started doing typing because they wanted to know. And I'm like, I don't care. In the dairy industry, all I need to know is a gram negative or gram positive. That would tell me, number one, where was the most probable introduction into the process? And number two, from a gram negative to gram positive, that tells me which types of chemistry I'm going to use to get rid of it. Same thing in a dry environment. If we have salmonella there, if we have high EB counts there, we have a problem and we just need to clean it. And we have to take a holistic approach to this. Yes, if we have there is some differences, but if you have a resident strain, but at the same time, if I have hits here, 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 and here, I have a bigger problem and I just need to get it clean and fix what's causing that. So, I struggle with WGS. I know a lot of microbiologists do, and a lot of attorneys do, and everybody does. So I'll stop there. So I could go on forever.
Well, I think that's a perfect transition to our closing out our chat here for today. Is everything is a risk-based decision. You need to evaluate these things from risk. There is no one size fits all. What's right for us? What's right for this particular environment? What's right for this application? Do I have a biofilm? Do I have areas where I can't get to? Are my cleaning agents being destroyed by the actual environment itself? And understanding these things, right? You have to step back and look at these. And with that, we were chatting here a little bit before we got going. This really links back to what I'm now launching is this risk assessment program for companies. And really, it comes down to what we're doing right here: is ask questions. Well, why are we doing this? How are we doing this? The Columbo thing again. Excuse me, I've got a question here. Why are we doing right? And the answer could very well be, well, that's always how we've done it, right? So somebody worked here 20 years ago and set up this program, and nobody's ever looked at it again.
Yep,
that's
amen.
risk.
Tim, you said it: critical thinking and then appropriate action. And critical thinking is a lost art I see in a lot of facilities, and we have to start fostering critical thinking. And that comes down to the frontline employees. They're our critical thinkers. They're the ones who know what's going on, and we have to support that.
Yep. You cannot, I don't care what the program is, quality, sanitation, food safety, it doesn't matter. You cannot design and create programs and systems of control sitting in your office.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Brian, somebody mentioned up at the top, do I use UV light for biofilm? They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can answer that question. Beside the point, yes, I do. I'll just say that, but you can ask me questions on LinkedIn, and I'll help you through that.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you have a kosher facility and somebody's got a kosher question, and you go to ask your rabbi, it's always the same answer. It depends. right?
That's the microbiologist answer. It depends.
Exactly. Man, time flew, Neil. Thanks for joining us. This has been a fantastic chat. So I just put in here, guys, the link to the locals group. Again, it's free. I'm going to put the documents from FDA, the guidance document, in there for everybody. So you got access to that. If you're in the locals group, when I put things in there, I actually send out a push. So you will know. You don't have to go in there and check. When I put something new, I automatically send a notification to everybody that's in the group that says, "Hey, new thing," and then you can go in there and take a look at it. It's a fantastic way to share information, right? What this is all about. And of course, thank you to Hogan and Levels and to Miley and Annika for putting together a really nice article. Again, the link is in here in this chat as well. I'll put it in there too, so everybody's got access to that. Any other closing thoughts here, Neil, as we close out?
Just wanted to thank everybody for what they do. If you're joining us today, that means you care, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well said. And with that, guys, a very, very fast chat now comes to a conclusion with the amazing Neil Bogart.
We need another
and
hour.
Of course, me too. We'll be back, of course, next week at the same time on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we live stream at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And I'll bring another amazing food safety dude like Neil on the chat. So in the meantime, guys, have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. And we'll do it all again next week. So have a great one, and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.